between artworks that are single artworks, like a particular painting, like the Mona Lisa, on the one hand, and then on the other hand, things that are these multiple artworks, like pieces of music or theatrical performances or novels that seem to admit of multiple different instances, and it's difficult to identify any one single thing that exists in space and time, at any rate, as being that artwork. So this suggests a way of figuring out about just what exactly artworks are. So one theory is to say, well, look, for these single artworks, like an individual painting like the Mona Lisa or the Night Watch, there it seems safe to say that those just are physical objects, these things that exist at a particular time and a particular place. They can move around to different places, but they always are located in both time and space. But then when it comes to something like the novel Pride and Prejudice or the song Yellow by Coldplay, it doesn't seem like you can identify any particular physical object which is the artwork there. So the theory goes, well, for multiple artworks like that, multiple artworks, those must be what are called abstract types. So a type is something that exists outside of time and space. It doesn't have any particular place or time at which it exists. Think about the way back in the term when we were talking about Plato and Aristotle. Plato had this idea of ideal forms that exist outside of time and place, and now that sounds all kind of spooky and a little weird. But I think I told you at the time, if you think about it, it's really difficult to explain a lot of stuff if you don't think that at least some things exist as these types or these ideas. So think about numbers, for example. There's just, you can write down a symbol or the word 3, but whatever you write down on the page when you're, figuring out your math problems, that's not the number 3, right? If you erased the marks that you made on your page, you wouldn't have succeeded in destroying the number 3. You would have just destroyed a symbol that happens to be of the number 3. But the number itself, it seems like, yeah, that would still continue to exist even if we just completely annihilated the Earth, for example. So that seems to be like it's something that must exist somehow out of time and place like that. And so what we can say is that things like works of music, like the song Yellow by Coldplay, or a novel like Pride and Prejudice, those aren't individual physical objects, because after all, you cannot destroy the artwork by destroying any individual physical object. Instead, we should think about what those artworks are as being these abstract types that exist outside of time and outside of space. They don't exist in any particular location, and they exist eternally. Kind of weird, but it kind of fits the data that we've got on hand. So that's a very common theory about what makes the difference between the kinds of things that single artworks are, namely physical objects. If I went to the Mona Lisa and burned it to a crisp, well, I would have destroyed the artwork, the Mona Lisa, because I would have destroyed the physical object, that particular piece of I think actually the Mona Lisa might be painted on wood. I don't remember offhand, but that particular thing, if I burn that to a crisp, it's gone. But if I burn my copy of Pride and Prejudice that's sitting on my bookshelf, or erase a song from it's kind of hard to do this now because like even the songs we listen to don't really exist on like a tape or a record or a CD or whatever. But if I had a CD with the song Coldplay on it and I destroyed that CD, I wouldn't have destroyed the song. The song would still exist. So we should think about the song as this abstract type that doesn't exist at any particular location or time. So that's the theory. Now, there are some problems with this theory that get brought up in that chapter that I gave you to read this week. So the first kind of really bizarre consequence of this theory that makes some people think that no, artworks just can't be abstract types is that if artworks are abstract types, that means that artists never actually create them. Because after all, when you create something, there's a time at which the thing did not exist, and then you create it, at which time the thing comes into existence. But remember, types, they're supposed to exist outside of time. They exist in all time, eternally. So, it's not like anyone ever created the number 3. No one ever even created the number pi, or no one ever created even imaginary numbers like the square root of -1. Now, it's true that some people discovered the existence of those numbers. People didn't realize what number pi was initially, but then we discovered it. So you can discover types, but you can't create them because they always existed before anyone ever came along, and they will forever. So if you think about a song or a novel as being a type, you've got to think about the thing as existing prior to any artist coming along. So we'd have to say that if Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice is a type, it has always existed, it always will exist outside of time. When Jane Austen came along, she didn't create it. It was already there. She just discovered it. She happened to be the one that put marks on a piece of paper that kind of uncovered this type that had already existed out in, say, the realm of form someplace already. So it seems very weird to say that artworks, like works of music or novels, are discovered. We often talk about them as being created. We say, yeah, Jane Austen created this new novel, Pride and Prejudice. But if the type theory is true, then our way of talking about that must be false. So that's one reason why you might think, maybe the type theory is not true. Well, another weird consequence of all of this is that if artworks aren't created, but they're just discovered, they exist outside of time and space, there's no real definite meaning or interpretation for any piece of art. If you think about, say, a piece of poetry, you might think, a piece of poetry, that is just some abstract sequence of words. That, of course, makes you wonder what exactly a word is. But if it's just a sequence of words, you realize, well, different words at different times, different places, in different societies, in different language groups, seem to mean different things. So if a poem just is this sequence of words, there's no definite meaning. It's just going to the meaning of any poem is just going to depend on what people make of it, depending on the practices and the language of the community that they're in when someone happens to discover that abstract type. You can think about, like the same word, say soy. Well, in the English language, that word soy means a kind of bean that you can make tofu with. In another language, like Spanish, soy means to be. Or does it? It means I am, I guess. It's been a while. But it's a form of the word to be. So it's not like there's any one definite meaning or interpretation of the word soy. The interpretation is going to depend on whether you're using it within the context of English speakers or using it in the context of Spanish speakers. Well, if artworks are like words and they're some sort of abstract type like that, then same with artworks. There's not going to be any standard meaning or interpretation that they have. Another worry is that if multiple artworks are just these abstract types, there doesn't seem to be any really good reason to say that single artworks, like the Mona Lisa, shouldn't be just types as well. Why should we consider the Mona Lisa to be a physical object rather than a type? It seems like we might as well just say, oh no, the Mona Lisa when Da Vinci painted the Mona Lisa, he wasn't creating a new physical object that's the artwork. No, he was merely discovering this abstract pattern of pigments, which has always existed, and then he was just creating, or not creating, but discovering that and putting one version of that abstract pattern on a particular piece of canvas or wood or whatever it's on. So that's the artwork is not that individual physical object. That individual physical object, that's just more like a cassette tape or a CD, a physical object that just happens to hold one particular instantiation of the abstract type, which is a piece of music. And so that you can see, well, gosh, if you're going to say that about the Mona Lisa, it starts to make more sense for Maurizio Cattelan to say, yeah, the artwork I created, Comedian, yeah, in a certain sense, it's a banana duct taped to a wall, but the physical banana and the duct tape, that's not the artwork. No, the artwork is this abstract pattern of a piece of duct tape and a banana being related to one another in some particular way. And I just discovered that artwork and, made one copy of it. This other artist came along and ate it, so I just made another copy. Just like a musician would discover a song, play one version of it, record it to a CD, somebody breaks the CD, no problem, they haven't destroyed the song, they just make another copy of the master CD, and boom, you've got the same song, because the artwork itself is just this abstract thing that isn't tied to any physical object. But if that's true of the Mona Lisa, it's kind of weird why people care so much about when people say, every once in a while, like somebody will come up and attack a sculpture or a painting and try to destroy it. Somebody, I think in the 90s, took a sledgehammer to Michelangelo's Pietà, the statue of Mary holding Jesus, and broke off its toe. And people are just horrified, because we can make a really, really good reproduction of that sculpture, but people tend to say, well, it's just not the same. Why? Because the artwork really depends on being a particular physical object. So it's hard to see why we should say that some artworks are physical objects and others are abstract types. And then the other really bizarre consequence is that if all artworks are types, then it doesn't seem like there can be any sort of things as a forgery. Where a forgery is somebody who comes up and makes a copy of a piece of art and tries to pass it off as the real thing. Well, if artworks are not physical objects, then there's no such thing as a physical object that just is the real thing. Back around, I think it's like around World War II, someone stole the Mona Lisa. It was missing for a long while, and while it was missing, somebody made at least 6 different forgeries or copies of the Mona Lisa, and even sold some of them to people who thought that it was the actual Mona Lisa, which had been stolen. So there seems to be the sense in which we want to say, no, of all those 7 things, the Mona Lisa that got stolen, plus the 6 copies that were made, only one of them is the real Mona Lisa. The other 6 are forgeries. But if artworks are just abstract types, then none of those are the real Mona Lisa. The real Mona Lisa is not a physical object. It does not exist in time or space. So any one of those has just the same status as the others. So we really shouldn't care whether we've got the quote-unquote original Mona Lisa or not. They're all just good instantiations of that abstract type. Just like no one should really care whether, your copy on your CD of a song is the same as my copy on my CD of the song, because it's not like one is the original. They're just 2 different instances of the same abstract type. So those are some challenges to this theory that some artworks are abstract types. But if you want to reject that theory, then the problem is trying to give an account of how things like novels and music and prints can be identified by some physical object or something else. In the next video, I'll talk a little more about forgeries and how we might go about trying to distinguish real art from forged copies of art.